Good evening, one and all. My camera is a little bit off a kilter, so let's fix that now. Welcome to the party stream! Yeah, party! Alright, hopefully some people are going to go ahead and join us and do some chatting coming up soon. We have a fun, paint-filled night for you today on this lovely Thursday. And I totally forgot to get my drink, so I'm going to go ahead and get that before I get started, because I am a bad streamer, and that's what I do. Alright, I'll cut that part out of the YouTube video, or I won't, whatever. So, everybody, we are doing some fun stuff today. We are, of course, doing some mini painting, like we always do. I am going to continue on my mission to finish out my Stargrave crew. I've got my Pterodactyl man, that I'm painting them all with inspiration of birds, and I'm currently in Florida birds. So he is going to get some inspiration from the peacock. And also, because of our topic conversation, I've got this bat demon from Reaper. We're going to try to get them both painted tonight. We'll see how that goes for us. Let's go over our standard list of supplies. We have, of course, our normal collection of brushes. I've got my cheap makeup brushes for the dry brushing because they seem to be doing a really good job for that. I have my water palette. I have the wet palette, my paper towel, my plenty of paints. I've got my cutting mat to protect my table, even though I don't care about this table very much. And of course, the most important painting supply of all, a nice stiff drink that I'm about halfway through already. Just drinking beer tonight. They had a buy one get one sale on Golden Monkey Belgian Tripel at my local grocery store, so I am loaded with it. Alright, so the topic for today, for all of you who are not familiar with it, there was a new D&D release this week. The first D&D release that I've really been looking forward to. Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. I will be doing a full in-depth review of it, like I did with Deadlands: The Weird West. But I'm going to be doing that in a little bit. I'm not going to be doing that quite yet, because I haven't read the entire book. And you can find plenty of content reviews and page-throughs and flip-throughs. I'm not about that. If I'm going to go and do a review of something, it's going to be a nice, in-depth, long-form review. So once that happens, expect me to pull it out. I'll probably talk about it for about an hour, but I need to have that thing 100% read before I do that. And I do think that everybody will appreciate the fact that I want to do that. All right. So because Van Richten's just came out, we have a, hey, Cat's Mini Art, thank you for joining us. I'm going to be rambling about some spooky stuff today, and I went ahead and put on the Industrial Station on Pretzel Rocks. For those of you who have not checked out Cat's Mini Art and More on Facebook and Instagram, please do. She is an extremely talented fine artist who has really inspired me to step up my game in so many different ways. So we are going to be discussing a topic very near and dear to my heart, horror in tabletop role-playing games. Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft is obviously Ravenloft, and that is the horror setting for D&D. For years and years and years, it was just, hey, Salarius, how are you doing, buddy? For a long time, it was just Gothic horror. But the new edition has kind of changed that around a little bit. Yeah, welcome to the stream where we are going to be painting. Got my Stargrave crewman, and I also have a Reaper bat demon, because our topic today is going to be horror in role-playing games. But let's go and get the painting while I start talking. Got a little bit of stuff on my palette already. This is the Reaper Void Blue. This is from their Bones paint line, which is a good kind of jack-of-all-trades paint line. And we're going to go and put this over our guy here, and we're specifically going to put it over his head, because he is going to be doing a lot of color shifting between his head going all the way down his body. I probably shouldn't have put as much on as I did, But I did, so mistakes were made. We'll just waste a little bit of paint. That's fine. This will give us a nice deep blue to work off of. So, horror in role-playing. First off, as a little bit of background, I am a huge fan of all things spooky, and I love, love, love me some horror. I think the last 3 or 4 books that I read were all horror in some way, shape, or form. By the way, the next one we're going to be doing is Marine Teal, and we're going to go and do this over his arms and legs. I just finished reading The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. It's a short book, but it is considered a horror classic if you have not read it. So I've been running horror games for a very long time. I fell in love with Deadlands. Call of Cthulhu is one of my absolute favorite. Yeah, spooky is best, Cat's Mini Art says. I completely agree. Which is one of the reasons why we get along so well. So, that's a little bit too. Now keep in mind, I'm doing these inspired by peacocks. I'm not actually going to be doing a one-for-one translation. So anyway, horror is near and dear to my heart. I do love all things spooky. I do run Call of Cthulhu as often as I can. I run Deadlands pretty regularly. My horror pedigree is deep, and it is what I love running the most. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go talk about this, because as far as I'm concerned, and from what I can tell, horror is kind of a little bit of an odd duck when it comes to genres, because so much of it is based on execution. And I find that it is probably, and don't get me wrong, if you're doing GMing and running RPGs, there's technique in doing any type of game, but horror seems to live and die off of the technique being used by the storyteller. And of that, there's a lot of different types of horror. By the way, I've done a small bit of work on this. I did the dark elf shadow and the highlight up to the dark elf skin and the washing on his area that's going to be that color. So, yeah, if by the way, if this kind of like schizophrenic two-tone conversation bothers you guys, please let me know. I'm always willing to modify my format. But the horror is largely dependent on tone and atmosphere. I've often heard it said that horror and comedy are very close to each other because they both rely on the same concept of both subverting expectations as well as build up and payoff. That's really what you need to do for horror, the build up and payoff. Building that suspense is very important. Heard it once said, I don't remember who said it, but if you have a story and you have a bomb explode, then you get drama and tension for all of 2 seconds. But if you have a bomb in the middle of the stage and say it will explode, then you have tension until that bomb explodes. So, from that, I'd like to go ahead and discuss actually what makes horror horror. I believe it was Lovecraft in his essay, Supernatural Horror in Literature, posited that there's really, when we talk about horror and when we talk about fear, we're not really talking about one emotion, we're talking about 3. There's fear, there's horror, and then there's terror. Now, it is very, very easy in storytelling to go from terror to horror and horror to fear, but it's really difficult to go back up. And as I understand them, fear is basically just a pure adrenaline response. That is your fight or flight method. When you wind up getting most like action horror, most zombie horror, that kind of stuff, you're dealing with a basic fear response. To put it quite frankly, things that had a fear associated with them in literature, these aren't the things that are really going to stick with you. By the way, we're going to start on the Bat Demon, and we have some Shield Brown by Reaper. Let's see if this actually works, or if it is too dried up. Oh man, that's a thick one. That is some thick paint. Let's get our safety pin. So most people, when they think of horror, and whenever you have, like in a scary movie, when you have your jump scares, this is hitting fear. It's good for a cheap thrill. It'll get people at first. Oh yeah, this is completely that's useless. I can't use this paint. Screw you, Shield Brown. You are no longer being used. What are we going to use instead? So, doing this sphere, it's really good. There you go. We'll use Earth Brown. Fear is good for an immediate response, but it's not really going to stick with people. Now, if you notice, most scary movies and most scary books and whatnot, they rely on a sense of anticipation. And this is where you get horror, where the genre is named after. Horror is all about the anticipation, the atmosphere, knowing that something is there, but not being able to see it. And that little instance there, not being able to see it. Remember, the less you can see something, the scarier it is. The scariest thing you will ever run into is the unknown. Nothing is more scary than that. And that is really the core of what we fear as humans. Then you have terror. A lot of times, initially, terror will be boring. If you've ever seen, like if you've ever been in a comedy and seen a funny movie, and it has that kind of like slow burn comedy effect where it's like, you don't really laugh when you see it. It's like, okay, ha ha ha, yeah, whatever. But then like a while later, you get the joke, and then you really understand it, and then you laugh uproariously when you hear it. That's kind of like the comedy version of what I'm talking about when we move into actual terror. Functionally speaking, terror is when the scariest thing happening is the implications. And if something really dives deep into the terror aspect of this, that is when these things will stay with people. That's when they'll go ahead and haunt their dreams. And I will be completely honest with you, that is a really, really difficult spot to hit because you've got to go ahead and play on individual fears. And not just individual fears. And I'm not talking about like an individual phobia. I know when I do finally go over my guide to Benlicht Ravenloft. Yeah, Sarah says, I see you shiver with anticipation. Yes. You know, by the way, you can tell a lot about a person by by what movie they remember Tim Curry from. Yeah, so terror, it's the implications that are really it. And this is the thing where it'll scare you afterwards. Where it'll be like weeks later, and it just still hasn't left your brain. It's kind of like curled up in there and made a home. And that's really difficult to do, especially on a tabletop role-playing game. So normally when I recommend when people are running horror in tabletop RPGs, I normally recommend that they kind of like stick with that mid-level, that horror, and kind of try to bounce into the fear, and then overall over the course of the campaign, hit that terror maybe once or twice. It's tough to do, it takes a lot of practice, but the horror, once you actually know what you're doing, it's actually not that difficult to do. It just requires a little bit of finesse. Finesse that, as far as I'm concerned, is kind of difficult to get in D&D for a lot of different reasons. I know once I go over my long form review of Enrichtens, I'll go into the reasons why I think that D&D as a whole doesn't lend itself very well to horror, just due to the systems. D&D has a very large element of mechanics and power fantasy to it, and it always kind of has to a point. Not as much in the old days, but especially since 3rd edition. And a lot of horror is about disempowerment. So, but let's go and talk and we'll see what you can do to kind of incorporate this stuff into your games. First off, the biggest thing you can do, and this is really, really important, is to have a conversation with your players. It's not necessarily the type of thing where you want to make sure to avoid triggers or that kind of stuff, because to a certain point, horror should make you uncomfortable, but the players not the characters, the players need to be aware of what they're getting themselves into. You don't want to run a horror game without everybody in that group knowing that the game is going to be horror, because this is starting to touch on stuff that people may have a lot of difficulty with. Now, this is where I'd also like to go ahead and talk about the difference between phobias and traumas. I do know that there is a tendency right now, like I said, and I know Van Richten talks about this, that you should go ahead and discuss every element of what may be included in with your party, with your players. And I will disagree with this to a point. I don't think it's strictly necessary. I think to a point, it will also kind of ruin a lot of the mystique if people know what's coming, because that level of the unknown is part of what makes horror function. So, for instance, the big thing that I disagree with that they comment in Ben Richten's guide is they say that if one of your players has problems with spiders in real life, under no circumstances should you feature spiders in your game. And I will actually disagree with that. I have no problem playing on phobias. I will do it. I have done it, and I don't regret it. What I don't play on is traumas. And I think that's really the damaging thing that can wind up happening that people run into. And this is dealing with sexual assault, the R word that will get you demonetized on YouTube, things like violence against children. And I think as a general rule, it's a good idea to just steer clear of that stuff. Yeah, Celery says, as long as the Spider Mini isn't a real spider, I'd be okay. Yeah, don't put real spiders on your table, guys. I mean, like, I guess that if that works for you, do it, but just don't do that. That's a bad idea. Like, don't use live animals in your games. So, I know if any of my players are watching, they're kind of going to see a little bit of the man behind the curtain for how I do these things, but I don't really have a problem with that. So, the first thing that I say when it comes to horror is understanding how to make an atmosphere of disquietude. You need to find a way to make your game. It's just getting that creepy atmosphere. And a lot of that is going to be based on the GM and how you describe things. Now, which by the way, we're going to go ahead and move to. As I'm sitting here just constantly talking and jumping back and forth between topics, we're going to keep working on this Bat Demon, but I'm going to go ahead and paint a little bit on his kind of fleshy bits. So we have our Barbarian flesh. There you go. So if you're doing this kind of stuff, try to have some element of atmosphere. Be very descriptive with the atmosphere. And of course, make things dark and gloomy and, make it so players can't really see or hear all that much. But it's a lot more than that. When you use your descriptions, and this is very important in horror games, your players have 5 senses. People want... It's kind of like our own nature, because as humans, we are such visual creatures. We rely on our eyesight way more than most animals do. Incorporate the other senses. And incorporate as many of the other senses as you can. Like, let's say you're playing this Ravenloft game. You can say the mists are dark and they swirl around you, all that kind of stuff, and describe how difficult it is to see. But then that's not necessarily, that can be kind of spooky. But if the player characters are being surrounded by the mists of Ravenloft, and you're not describing those mists as that cold clamminess that just sticks to their skin and penetrates their clothes, giving them a chill that they just can't shake no matter how close to the campfire they get. Or even worse, if it's warm and it's still misty, how things start getting just sticky and oppressive. Like Florida in the summer. And that is when you start getting interesting. What just winds up adding stuff. You can add sounds. Now, we do tend to add a lot of sounds, so I'm not going to go too much into that, because it's, the idea of, you hear somewhere in the distance a wolf cries. And the players are going to wonder if that wolf is going to be part of the game or if it's just kind of there. That's all well and good. That's another great thing to add. So we've had 3 of the senses. And now this is when we get the fun part. I've had a lot of people say, well, come on, Party Bear, how can you incorporate haste? Hey, Elmerin, how you doing? We're talking about horror in role-playing games and all sorts of spookiness. And I'm recommending right now that people, if they're describing situations, they need to use all 5 senses. And yes, I do mean all 5 of them. Smell is one of the best ways to creep your players out. Scientifically, your sense of smell is the most linked to your emotional state. And that's why when you go ahead and describe something with a fetid odor, or the smell of rot, or something that makes your stomach churn. It evokes a reaction. It evokes a very visceral emotion. That's why perfumes are so popular, because people associate smells with memories. It's very, very closely linked in your brain. Now, very, very closely linked to smell is taste. Now, this is one that's a little bit tricky because last I checked, most people are not going to be sitting there licking monsters. Not literally. And if they do, well, I don't know what kind of game you're running. I'm not judging. So we're being a little bit sloppy with this coat, but we're going to put one. I should probably tell you what color I'm using. Where did I put it? This is... I put it back in the thing. This is Reaper Deep Red, one of the OG Master Series paints. Yeah, celeries taste like chicken. If your monsters may taste like chicken. I mean, who knows what your monsters taste like? Maybe they taste of chicken, which means that chicken tastes of monster. So, by the way, I'm currently listening to the Industrial station on Pretzel Rocks because I figured it was a little more appropriate to our discussion today. So they may not be listing a much of a taste, but go ahead and think of it as more like a mouthfeel. Go ahead and think like if you're sitting there describing a situation and just saying that all of a sudden you have like a tangy, coppery taste in your mouth or something along those lines. Random tastes in your mouth freak people out just because it's so not what's expected. And by doing this, by having just being very vivid in your descriptions, but never completely describing something. And in fact, the more you involve the other senses and the less you involve sight, the more mysterious these things become. They're still sensing. I mean, they're still aware of what's going on, but they never quite know what's going on. And that level of ignorance is very important to do. And which will bring us to another topic in a little bit, how important ignorance is. Yes, Ilmarin says it's very personal, and that is extremely true. Taste is... If smell is linked to your memories and your emotions, taste is something that is just deeply, deeply personal, and even more than that, it's a very sensual thing. And while I'm not necessarily saying you have to feature it in your games, there's a reason why so many people link food and sex. Because they both kind of trigger similar responses in people. And you can use that. I mean, it can be super disquieting, or you can describe how somebody's gorge is rising and how they just have the taste of bile in their mouth coming from their own back of the throat. And that will elicit a response. And to a very big extent, that's really what you're aiming for with this stuff, is just to elicit an emotional response. It is manipulative, and I will not say otherwise. The core of horror is manipulation. And is specifically manipulating towards a single feeling, and that's your fear, horror, terror that we discussed earlier. Ilmarin says, tastes are also very individualized, however, so you got to watch that. That is true. And that brings up to the point that, and I know I had mentioned before, that I don't necessarily put out a full survey of triggers to my group, but you need to read the room. You need to be paying attention, and there's a difference between fun scared and scared scared. And that's one of the reasons why I will never be playing on real-life traumas. I just don't feature that stuff in my games for a lot of reasons. I don't find it to be fun. I don't find it to be entertaining. And we're all very entertained. So we have now Koala Greenshade, for those who are paying attention to my painting and not my rambling. We're going to apply it all over our Pteranodon Peacock Man. So, being descriptive is one thing. But then there's the thing of what you want to leave out. And this is the very fun thing about monsters, is that if you pay attention to a good monster flick, a good monster movie, monsters are scariest when you never see them. And this is kind of like an ongoing joke, is that the rule one of horror movies and monster movies is you never show the monster. But everybody wants to know what the monster looks like. And it's that level of never getting a full resolution and satisfaction that can keep your monster scary. If you could go ahead and have a monster that you completely show and it still is scary, kudos to you. That's when you've got to start hitting the real crazy stuff. Ilmer asks, have I ever seen The Descent, the early 2000s one? I have not. I have actually not seen it, and it's one of those movies that I always kind of meant to. I'm aware of what it's about, and I know that it features a very strong element of what Kat's Mini Art over there really, really likes about her particular type of horror. Yeah, monsters get shown, but hey, Kat's Mini Art like an alien, exactly, perfectly like Alien. And that's one of the reasons why the first Alien was so damn scary, was because nobody knew when the first Alien came out. Nobody knew what that thing looked like. Nobody knew what xenomorphs were. They didn't know what xenomorphs were. They didn't know what the alien looked like. And on top of that, it looked so completely different from every other movie monster that had ever been out. And people were terrified. And on top of that, you had a sci-fi movie where all the characters were deeply, deeply human. Deeply flawed. Yeah, Ilmarin says, on the key that you're on now, when the characters encounter the monster the first time, the cast had not seen any promo art. Yeah, exactly. I mean, nobody knew what that thing looked like. And it was some sort of horrible Geiger-inspired monster. And that's actually a big part of the reason why in the second one they managed to still keep it good, because even though everybody knew what the monster looked like at that point, it wasn't really a horror movie. The second movie was really an action movie. So, by the way, we got Requiem Fleshshade, and we're going to go put all over that demon. So, this brings up the thing that as a tabletop role-playing game, and this is one of the big differences between books and movies when it comes to horror, and where I think that books naturally have an advantage. In a book, you can have a monster standing directly in front of the characters. And just however much the author chooses to describe, that's how much the reader sees. So if they decide to be vague with their descriptions, that's perfectly fine. You can have a monster in perfectly plain sight and have it still be scary. Movies don't really have that option. They got to play camera tricks and do all that kind of stuff. And in this regard, role-playing games are a lot more like the movie than they are. They're a lot more like the books than they are movies, because your description is entirely up to you. And this is why, while it may seem like absolute blasphemy for anyone who is watching me do this, if I'm running a horror game, I do not use miniatures. Or if I do, I will use miniatures for the player characters, but not for the monsters. Even though I have so many of them, and I have some of horrible Lovecraftian monsters, I don't use them. And this seems weird for me because I love my miniatures. Ilmarie says, so there's a scene where all the characters are in a room doing a thing, turn the lights up, and the monster had snuck on set. The terror is pure. Yeah, absolutely. And that right there is another thing that a lot of people will rely on camera tricks and dark, moody atmosphere and all that kind of stuff, and specifically darkness, in order to maintain a scary tone. Which, my personal opinion, the best element, the best horror thing that has come out in the past 10 years is the Netflix series The Haunting of Hill House. It is, I'm not even going to say based on, it draws inspiration from the book, but it is absolutely brilliant. I did not like the ending at first. I thought that kind of didn't stick it, but on a rewatch, I really liked the ending. It is absolutely fantastic. And the fact that they're able to take a single scene that's like 40 minutes long in a brightly lit room that's a single camera shot with a moving camera and have it be absolutely terrifying. And if you've seen it, you know which scene I'm talking about. And it is completely terrifying. It's wonderful. So yeah, you have the advantage on that you can describe as much as you want. Now we're gonna have to wait for this to dry because we put some stuff on pretty sloppy. So we're gonna go ahead and do what we do always, and we're just gonna apply other colors until we get it dry to the point where we can work on it. Okay, Steel. So yeah, be descriptive. But this brings up to another thing, that because naturally we are not as descriptive as what we see, there's a very simple solution to making any monster much, much scarier than it should be. And that's never name it. And I mean this. Don't name it. Never name your monsters if you're running terror. If you're running horror. Let the player characters. Let the players name the monster. That's perfectly fine. But naming something makes it more known and thus makes it less scary. With this, I know the description that I like to see a lot of time for Ravenloft is people describing a basic D&D troll. Well, you know, troll, it's a challenge rating, whatever. They're not that high. You know, they're low to mid level monsters. They're not that scary, all that kind of stuff. But if you describe them well enough, they can be terrifying. Well, they're even more terrifying if you'll describe them, but you never name them. Don't ever say it's a troll. And if the player characters come up with a name for a monster, like if they're, you know, they say, okay, these fishmen or these frog people or, you know, shag nasty or whatever you want to call it, don't use that name. Yeah, Cat's mini art, like it. That is a perfect example. The Deadlights, Pennywise the Clown, all of these different names for that individual being of it, those are just names that other people have given it to define it. It doesn't actually have a name that it gives itself at all. And that's scary. The fact that whatever that creature is not defined. It's definitely got rules. And that's another thing, that when you're doing this stuff, and Stephen King clearly did this, it follows rules. It just never bothers to explain what those rules are. Which brings us to another point. Don't explain anything. Don't give exposition. Don't feel the need to tie things off with a bow. If fear of the unknown is fear of the unknown, bring the unknown into your games. Bring the uncertainty. You don't have to tie everything off with a bow. I mean, most things in RPGs don't really get tied off with a bow anyway, but especially in horror games, do not feel obligated to do that. And you'd be surprised how big of a difference that can make for your games. I need to read it. I understand that, especially considering it's from everything I've heard, it is the most Lovecraftian novel that Stephen King ever wrote. But I think it's going to be a while before I ever get to it because I just started rereading The Wheel of Time, and that's going to take me a long, long time. Let's go ahead and do this base for the Bat Demon. Yep, Cat's mini art. Yep, more fear in the unknown. Yeah, absolutely. And it always bothers me when a horror movies completely wrap themselves up, because that's just not how it goes. If you want a really good example of something that's not necessarily supposed to be scary but works out really well, the new season of Love, Death, and Robots. One of the shorts is about Santa Claus, and it's fantastic. It's my favorite one of the season. But that is a perfect example of like leaving questions unanswered and how that can wind up creating a tremendous amount of fear and terror. So really, it's that sense of foreboding, but that sense of like, it's a disconnect you're looking for. You're looking for a dissonance. That things aren't working the way that they should. And that's how you kind of inspire a little bit of fear. Players naturally will go ahead and try to counter this with an element of bravado. It happens all the time. They'll make jokes, and they'll play around. And, you know, to a point, you can play along with that, and you can joke around with them, but try to be serious. Try to be a little bit more serious than the people around you. There's some techniques you can do to help with immersion. I know a lot of GMs like to dim the lights and put on creepy music and remove distractions and light candles and that kind of stuff. I tend to not do that, mostly because I've been doing this long enough that I can create a creepy atmosphere without it. But if that's stuff that you want to go ahead and use, by all means, go ahead. I mean, my ways of doing this are not the only way of doing it. Are you dry enough? Yeah, I think you're dry enough. Okay, we're gonna go start working on this guy's big fat peacock head. So because we're doing such a dark color, we're not going to do our normal blend of palette magic like we've been doing. We're just going to do a couple more transitional layers. And we're going to lighten it up quite a bit. We have some oceanic blue. And we're also going to have to do some additional layering on his face to add some peacock patterns. Which is going to be fun. So we're going to put a little bit of this oceanic blue here. And I think I might have lied a little bit. I think I am going to go add some transitionary layers. So, yep. Now, the other things you can do to scare people. This is where things start getting a little bit controversial. is that horror relies on realistically a couple of there are a couple of concepts that horror really relies on to trigger those emotions, and that is feelings of disempowerment and isolation. If you ever pay attention, in most horror movies, the very first thing that they do, especially modern day horror movies, very first thing that most of them do is they go ahead and remove the ability of the main characters to call for help. You're in a dead zone. Your cell phone battery is dead. You're in the middle of the woods and your phone is dead. When suddenly you see him, Shia LaBeouf. No, not really. Not necessarily that, but you don't necessarily have to completely remove your player's ability to communicate with other people, but it does help. You can do a level of social isolation where it can be something as simple as just nobody believes them, because that's one of the kind of tropes in horror. Is why don't these people go to the police? Well, sometimes they do, and the police don't do anything because the police don't believe them. Monsters don't exist, so we're not going to pay attention to you. You're just some crazy person. Let's go ahead and dot the I's. We got aged bone. Aged bone. But the other thing is disempowerment. Isolation is kind of just a, play around with it, keep them away from people, keep them isolated, remove them from help. The disempowerment gets a little bit tricky in RPGs, just because by nature of them, so many RPGs focus on the power of fantasy. Call of Cthulhu is built from the ground up to not empower your heroes. And if your heroes do feel empowered, just have them fight a single monster, and they're going to find out exactly how powerless they are. I do remember there's more than a few times I've run Call of Cthulhu games with people, and they've said, how on earth can this be scary when, we're in the modern day and we have access to all these weapons and firearms? I say, they're not going to help you. Remember, Call of Cthulhu is a game that has monsters that have the ability immune to damage. All forms of damage. This monster cannot die. Just older than death itself. And now we're just on that pure oceanic blue, by the way. So the disempowerment in role-playing games comes from the factor of everything that the player characters have can be taken away. And it can be taken away at a moment's notice. So next for our palette magic, by the way, we're going to go and take a little bit of that. Yeah, I think we're just going to continue with the blue. Going to move up to a tropical blue, and we're going to mix up with the oceanic blue. So everything they have can be taken away. And especially if you have their abilities that they've relied on work in different ways. Like I know in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and Ravenloft traditionally, detect evil spells flat out don't work. You can detect law, you can detect chaos, you cannot detect good and evil, because that removes a large element of the mystery. You need to maintain that mystery. Remove curse spells don't always work. They have prerequisites. Like if you want to go ahead and cure your friend who got bit by that Lugaroo, which is a particularly nasty type of werewolf. First off, you have to kill that werewolf. And then you get to cast the Remove Curse spell once per month. And on top of that, which is the best part of it, don't tell your player characters if the Remove Curse was successful. There is a monster in Deadlands. It's actually a traditional Chinese vampire called a Guanxi, hopping vampire, which is a wonderful, creepy form of vampire, first off. If you have not looked into Far Eastern and Chinese undead, oh god, you need to. They're fantastic. The Guanxi, it's the thing where if a Guanxi bites you, in order to prevent from being a Guanxi within a month, you have to perform this ritual that involves sitting in a circle and eating a very large amount of sticky rice, according to Deadlands. Well, the problem is, if you don't roll well enough on your thing to get sticky rice, you can get the wrong type of rice. And let me tell you what, watching people sweat when you ask them if they're sure they got the right type of rice, oh man, that's priceless. And it really focuses and works with that disempowerment element that I was talking about earlier. All right, so we're going to go ahead and step up that marine teal on the wings with the surf aqua. We're going to go and do our blending palette magic. So I wouldn't necessarily say that if the players have these abilities and powers and magic items and tools that they really worked for, to just take them away from them. I would say that, and this is one of the reasons why horror works better if it's there from the get-go. If it's just kind of thrown in for like a kind of like a 1 week in hell type deal, things tend to suffer. Take a thing from Call of Cthulhu. Whenever they do get powers, like with Call of Cthulhu, when there are spells, they can work. There's always a price. And that price can be something that maybe that they don't really want to do. Maybe the in order to cast a spell, it requires a ritual that has particularly distasteful components. Let's go ahead and thin this down a little bit, and we want to darken that because it's a little bit too light. Maybe, like I know I had, the book recommends distasteful components. Like maybe it requires human blood or human sacrifice or that type of stuff. Which that's easy to do, but maybe it requires like literal tears of children. Maybe it requires, you can do the whole blood of the innocent thing, and you can wind up really playing around with the morality of that, where, if you're really trying to stop these monsters, is this justified? You can play around with that and watch them play around with it. I know there's an adventure in Deadlands Hell on Earth for the Unity, which involves you being in a spaceship that's very much like the Event Horizon. Which, by the way, if you have not seen that movie, you need to. It is excellent. I love it. Very, very underrated sci-fi horror movie. But in order to power up the spaceship, when you get to the power core, it straight up tells you how you need to power it up. It's powered by murder. Not blood sacrifice, not death. It's powered by murder. And if you tell that to the player characters, you can literally just walk away and watch them talk themselves to death. I remember the few times that I've actually been able to run that adventure, that right there has been one of the most difficult moments I've ever seen in a role-playing game. Not the type of thing that I generally recommend. That's the type of thing for very, very mature players. But, late 90s and early 2000s are a wild time, guys. So, since we're kind of on this topic, I would like to go ahead and discuss a little bit of some of the reasons of why I think that D&D itself really doesn't lend itself well to horror. I've gone and spoken here on a couple times that I firmly believe that D&D is not necessarily high fantasy or epic fantasy or general fantasy. I think D&D's genre is D&D. I think that there are so many conceits to D&D that it might as well be its own genre. Obviously, you can disagree with me on that if you want, but that's kind of how I feel about it. And one of the big things on that is the prevalence and ease of resurrection magic. This is something that I've really been kind of... I think that it speaks to the fact that D&D still feels a lot like a video game fantasy. where they don't want to have your character permanently be dead if they're part of the story, all that kind of stuff. But every single time I've read a fantasy story, or really any story, and they bring a character back from the dead, it always just feels cheap. And it basically takes that concept of this character died, and you know, all of that stuff that the author will get from those stakes being raised, and completely reverses it. But more than that, it lowers the stakes for every other story in that arc. And especially when you're dealing with something like Ravenloft, which has its gothic horror roots. I mean, if you think about it, you know, you're dealing with Frankenstein and Dracula and the Wolfman and ghosts and ghouls and goblins and all that kind of stuff. You would think that the idea of resurrection would be rather unpalatable. And I know resurrection magic has a habit of not working in Ravenloft, but I like the idea that in the event you do want your character to come back from the dead and somebody decides to bring you back, there's a price. There's a horrible price, a dark, deep price that you don't want to pay. And bring in that concept of sometimes dead is better. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's when you really get the role playing in. Like maybe you can have your player characters working so hard and going on some sort of great quest to find a way to resurrect their fallen comrade. Finally bring them back. Find out that what they brought back isn't them. Maybe they're brought through the woods, through the Guardian, from a creepy old man who says that sometimes dead is better. And then whatever comes back isn't their friend. It's just shaped like their friend. It just looks like them. Read Pet Cemetery. Elmrin gives the Oogie questions too. Do we bring this person back knowing exactly? You know, and then in that case, especially if you get to that point where it's like, look, there's a reason why Pet Sematary is considered such a classic book and one of Stephen King's like most famous. In that case, dead is better because whatever comes back isn't them. It leads to some oogie, scary questions. Plus, it gives you as the GM the ability to not necessarily directly say no. You get to say yes, but. And that's really big and hard. Go ahead and add those prices. Add that stuff that just makes it difficult. So the other issue I have with D&D, it all comes down to hit points. It all comes back to the hit point abstraction. The way it scales, D&D is based off of your level, and your level determines what you fight. You can't really go above that, can't really go below that. I know we're gonna go straight to the, what is this? Surf Aqua now. One of the things that, like, in Ben Richton's Guide to Ravenloft, they have in the back, and I know it's based off of The Thing, by John Carpenter, but they have the Starspawn Emissary, and they go ahead and talk about, like, this thing can appear as anything, and even in its lesser form, it's a challenge rating 19 creature. So they just make these things really, really big and challenging, but that basically means that unless they have, like, a specific weakness that you're playing off of, they're basically unkillable and undefeatable. Which brings up to the other important part about horror, is that most people think that horror is all about hopelessness, and that's not true. Because if there's no hope, people either get completely paralyzed or they become grimly determined. And this is another weird quirk of human psychology, where it's the idea of, I may be going down, but I'm taking down you bastards with me. which is a way to quick way to go ahead and lose your element of terror and lose your element of horror and fear. It's kind of like the idea of which one is more villainous, taking a player character and completely murdering their town and their family and all that kind of stuff, or taking a player character, murdering their spouse and all but one of their children. I think it's far more villainous to leave one of them alive, and it's smarter villainy to leave one of them alive, because then you're not leaving them with nothing left. They still have something to lose. One of the things that doing a lot of horror will do is you will need to start thinking like an evil villain, like a monster. Because in most horror, there can be monsters, there can be literal monsters around, but there does seem to be a tradition that people liked telling the story of the real monster is humanity. Personally, I don't like those stories because I believe that the real monsters are monsters. And I play these games to escape away from the concept of the real monster as humans, which is another one of the reasons why I really like Lovecraft and I like cosmic horror so much, because when people say, well, the real monster is humanity, cosmic horror says, you haven't been thinking hard enough about your monsters. So, and I kind of appreciate that attitude towards it. Oh, he is starting to look good. I do need to lighten up a little bit more on this, so we're going to go ahead and take some frost blue and we're going to mix it with that surf aqua, just to continue lightening it up to make this just a really, really striking thing. Yep. So yeah, isolation, disempowerment, but not too hard. And that right there is the rub. That's probably what makes horror the difficult thing to run and why so many people have difficulty doing it. Because it requires a light touch. And this is where horror and comedy come into play. That they both rely on a very similar sense of timing that you need to be able to have. You need to be able to know when to go forward and when to scale back. And there's nothing else that can do this besides just having kind of an innate idea about psychology and knowing your table. And you need to be able to read the room. And that right there is one of the reasons why I don't think that those trigger warning questionnaires are something that I will generally do for horror. You may want to do this, and as always, if it works for your table, it works for your table. By all means, vaya con Dios, mi amigo. But I won't do that because I can read the room well enough, because I've been doing this long enough. Because if you are a good horror GM, the most important skill you have is reading that room and having that inherent knowledge of the psychology of your players. So that's basically what I'd recommend. Now is the time where I wish that we had more people chatting so I could just answer questions, because I have been doing this for a long time. But I will go ahead and finish off with some recommendations. If you want to know good ways to kind of build this atmosphere, I would recommend looking through and watching a whole bunch of really good haunted house movies. Ghost story movies work really, really well as kind of case studies in how to move forward with horror GMing, because they'll teach you the most difficult part, which is creating that creepy atmosphere. And then you'll also learn how the best things have the lowest special effects. Yeah, Ilmarin says he's only half able to focus. He's also watching a seminar. What kind of seminar are you watching? Because that seems all kinds of interesting. I gotta look something up real quick. I'm getting ready to work on this guy's head, and I need to see my reference image. All right. So we need to get some nice bright green. Let's pull out the Naga Green. Haha. Ilmrin, mass compliance, because yeah, I hear you on that. Alright, so because this is just going to be inspired by peacocks and not actually like a hardcore this is a peacock, we'll take this Naga Green, trace around his eyes. We still need to dot. I'm also going to do his crest and rain. Ilmrin says, ran out of pages about 8 months ago, but still trying, being yelly, doesn't get tons of compliance. No, it really doesn't. Unfortunately, it doesn't. Let's go ahead and apply some Null oil to this base. We'll wait for that green to dry. Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case. It'd be nice if everybody could just wear their masks, but, you know, I understand it is what it is. Yeah, moving in, trying to check out a couple of like RPG beginner Discord forums and kind of stuff to go ahead and get more people to come on in and ask questions, because I like the idea of turning these things into like a Q&A to go ahead and kind of give back a little bit to the community. Where is now Dark Elf Shadow? Yeah, I got a little bit of Dark Elf Shadow. I'm gonna go and dot these eyes. Let's let that dry. Time for dry brushing. Keeps the vibe flowing though. Yeah, no, it does. I mean, like, once again, I do wish that I could do a little bit more like Q&A stuff, but it's just kind of like a building up thing. There's the lid to my wet palette. Where did I put you? Oh. Got the barbarian flesh. I'm gonna go ahead and just do a real quick light dry brush. Let's mix the earth brown with the barbarian flesh. Yeah, but I figure I'll keep on. I think it'll be a week or two before I do my full in-depth review on Ben Richten's guide. I like what I see so far. It's the type of thing where from what I can tell, the book is a 50-50 split of horror GMing 101 and shoehorning D&D into a horror setting. And I do think that they're shoehorning quite a bit of it, because when you have to modify that many mechanics in order to make the genre fit, it starts feeling weird, and I kind of just be like, why aren't you just using a different system for this? It's like whenever people try to use a D&D to do modern stuff. I'm like, you know, there are better systems out there for this, but people are intimidated to learn new systems, and I get that. By the way, we got a warrior flush now. I'm gonna thin this down. Just mix a little bit of this brown in with that to go and darken it up a little bit. And we'll go ahead and just do one more step up with some Scholar Flesh. Yeah, it'll be nice painting two different minis because I can promote myself in two different groups. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and mix this in with the Warrior Flesh so it's not like so stark of a difference. Once again, this is, we're not doing a really very heavy paint job on this guy. This guy's just going to be like a simple side project that I'm going to do because I can't talk horror and not paint something horror related. Yeah, but I figure I should probably get to paint some more of my CAD stuff on stream. Went ahead and spent my gift card that I got from CavCon for winning some stuff. You can probably go ahead and use those guys to paint on stream. I figure kind of do a kind of like giving back type deal on that. That John was kind enough to go ahead and throw an online convention and threw some prize support, all that kind of stuff, and he worked really hard. So I think, you know, using my stream, even if it is kind of small, I don't have much of a microphone, but I got a bit of a microphone. And I think promoting that game a little bit more is a good idea. It's a fun game. They're good people. The thing I like about it is that you can tell that the passion for the game shows through in the designer. Ilman says a bit of metal in transit at the moment. Yep, that's I typically have metal in transit at the moment. More than I probably should have at any given time, but that's a different story. All right, back to Koala Green Shade, which is really halfway between green and blue. And we're gonna go with this green stuff that we did, and we're just gonna put a light coat of this. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and do my rock like that, like I did the one for the CavCon stream. I don't know if you got to see that. Gonna go to his armor, chestnut gold. Or I did the one that had kind of like the maroon and ochre striped pattern. The maroon and ochre striped camo pattern. They're called like the Prey Takers or something like that, but I really liked how it came out, so I want to go and do that for some rock. Like, I liked how well it came out that I'm like, I want to go and do this, but I really shouldn't buy any more miniatures right now because, you know, I have so many and I shouldn't be spending money on them. And then they're like, here's a bunch of store credit. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to paint these rock then. How's that substation going, by the way? I saw you were posting pictures and stuff. You got more coming our way? Decals are coming in soon. Awesome. Look forward to seeing it when you do. I mean, you go ahead and like post it on your Facebook or something like that. I'll go ahead and share it on my page. That is the nice thing about painting these guys. I've done enough of them that I've pretty much got my process down. Wilmerin says, a friend that plays ordered some and is trading a sheet of Adon for the Ritter that I had on hand. So when I see him next, I'll get the big empty wall decal. I'll post it then. Cool. I look forward to seeing it, man. I love seeing people work on big terrain projects like that. Like, I've got a bunch of model train buildings that I have that I got to finish getting painted and whatnot. It's one of the reasons why I was getting the airbrush set up. That's the thing. I just don't have enough time to play all the games that I want. So I said if I ever wound up winning the lottery and never had to work a day in my life, I'd go and open up a game store and just focus on painting and gaming, building the community. Yeah, the substation is model train stuff. Wilmerin says, Tommy Tomix, Tommy Tech, Japanese N-scale, weighs in at 1/150. Yeah, I got a bunch of stuff from, I'm pretty sure it's from China. It's called Outland Models. They did. It's model train stuff, and it's, like, it's modern, and it looks really basic, but it is cheap, 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 cheap. I got enough stuff I was kind of trying to put together, like a Terran military base. I should not leave my brushes in my water. It's a bad painter. Yeah, Cav is 1/180, so it's a little big, but yeah, it's also one of those things that scale is. I'm also convinced that scale is like guidelines. Oh, that got thinned out more than I wanted it to. Soak up some of that water. Yeah, John has been clear that there's a little wiggle in the units. Yeah, there is. Sometimes if you get the opportunity, if you go ahead and think of the idea that, like, if scale is a thing, and it winds up being that, like, 1/180 or 1/150 or whatever Cav is. I remember doing the math, and it winds up being that, like, 1 inch equals 15 feet. That's a pretty good rule of thumb for it, but if you take a look at, like, how big of an area a battlefield would actually be at that scale, it's tiny, and it's like real world modern day rifles can shoot across a Cav battlefield. Not necessarily accurately, but if you've got a sniper rifle and a scope, yeah, you can absolutely make that shot. Still less than a mile. So that's something I always found interesting anytime I looked at it. We are going to go ahead and do a little bit more Nuln Oil now that this is dried. Yeah, I remember when I was playing Malifaux, I wanted a really good idea of exactly how big an area you were fighting over, and somebody told me, it was like, oh yeah, well, it's basically fighting over a shopping mall. And it's like, no, it's fighting over your normal-sized gas station. Like, if you have a 7-Eleven, most, like, 3x3 skirmish games, that's what you're fighting in. You're fighting in an area the size of a 7-Eleven, including the fuel pumps. Not even a Wawa or a Buc-ee's. Like the new White Castle that they built in Orlando would be bigger than most 3x3 skirmish tables. All right, where is our contrast? There we go. Silicanum Gray. Let's get those guns. And paint should be dry on him relatively quick. I got that aged bone. Gonna apply it to these horns. Oh, that's an ear, not a horn. Oh well, that's a horn now. I'll do the flesh shade over them, and then it'll just look like I'm painting them lighter. But it wants a horn. Yeah, for anybody watching on YouTube, it's a... make mistakes all the time when you do this stuff. I'm going to take this opportunity while paint dries to go ahead and get myself another drink. Yeah, happy little accidents, exactly. And you thought we weren't going to invoke Bob Ross on this stream. You were wrong. There you go. Happy horns. Happy horns on the happy little bat demon. All right, we got a little bit more time for that guy to dry, so let's go ahead and move over to these wings. We got ourselves some blood red. I'm changing the station. I tried to do something a little bit spooky for the horror talk, but I think that's pretty much over. So we're going to go and change over to normal like synthwave station. There you go. Reaper, your highlights are always such a huge color differential from the previous shade, so we're going to just thin this down like crazy. Thin it down like crazy, and we're just going to feather up. So I also know that you are not going to dry nearly that red. I'll do a second coat of you later. Yeah, it's crazy when I wound up getting Ravenloft. Like, I'm excited about having it being able to play in Ravenloft again. I'm not going to do it in D&D. I might run Ravenloft in Savage Worlds just to go and actually get some horror element to it. I was more excited to see what my nephew thinks of it. Kid's, I think, 15 years old. Been playing D&D for right about a year now, I think. And I love talking to him about it because it's like, everything is new. Everything is new, and he has that magic to it. Just that wonderful experience of playing D&D when you're a teenager and just getting into it and just learning it. And it's unlike anything you've ever played before, and you're like, it's about storytelling and this and that, and you haven't been ruined by edition wars and optimization and game mechanics and all that kind of stuff. And oh man, it's just wonderful hearing it talk about it, and just brings me back. And I'm excited to see him like start seeing like the scary stuff and like the spooky stuff and the horror in my part of like the stuff that I really like. Gets a little bit older, introduced him to Call of Cthulhu. Because when I talked to him, he was like, yeah, I hear that there's like a description of like all the different subgenres of horror. And I'm like, yeah, you know, they've got a description of like a bunch of them. I wouldn't necessarily say it's all of them. But all right, there we go. A little bit of that read in. Let's see how this guy's doing. We are ready for the wash. Yeah, let's go ahead and do this. Seraphim Sepia. Bam. Well, Elmer, and I do appreciate you joining in, even if you're just kind of watching me in the background while you do your conference thing. Because it sounds like it is absolutely riveting what you're watching. Elmer says he's enjoying watching. Well, I do appreciate you coming by. I mean, hopefully you draw something from what I'm doing here. I mean, obviously, if you have any painting questions, I don't know. I've just seen your power substation. I don't know what level of painting you're on and whether or not like you can necessarily learn a lot from me. But I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have, provide any tricks or tips and whatnot. I know I paint real fast, and I know that's kind of like my shtick. Providing decent quality at a very fast pace. Let's go and work on that green on the top. Got some jade green. It says the webinar, mostly stuff I know, depressingly largely stuff complicated by local factors. It says most of your things look above where I see myself. Okay, well, you know. Yeah, say it feels like it's good learning. Good. I'm glad I can help. I mean, truth be told, it's like I'd love it if I could just do this full time and, you know, find a way to turn it into my job of just, you know, sit down, paint miniatures, and talk about games all day. Listen to crazy music that nobody else in my family knows what it is. Okay, this we're just going to go ahead and basically run this highlight as just a ton of little dots. Just rows of dots. Which, by the way, that is actually a recommendation of something you can do to really up your game with how things look. Go ahead and actually paint textures onto your miniatures. Right? Because you'd be surprised at exactly how just people don't think about doing that. All right, we're going to go ahead and do a little bit more color on his face to make him look like a peacock. We got some undead flesh here. Undead flesh is basically a slightly greenish off-white, which is why it's going to work for what we're about to do. Just going to do a little bit like that. So you see, kind of like just add a little bit more of that peacock to it. Yes, it will make the eye lie for you. It does. It does. And I mean, like, you know, that's really all what painting is just, you know, translating how 3D surfaces look into a 2D surface. Especially miniature painting. Let's go ahead and take this blade steel and let's highlight these guns a little bit. Yeah, this is one in Stargrave for now. I'm using this guy as my Pathfinder, which the Pathfinder is the faster dude. He's supposed to be armed with a rifle, but I think my opponents will go ahead and... I think it's easy enough to say that this is like the fast guy. Lightly armored, fast moving. I played Frostgrave. I know that lightly armored and fast moving is how you win the game. This guy will win you games. All right, let's go ahead and paint something fun. We got cursed gold. This gold is cursed. Just a little bit of it. I would paint it on his like breathing mask type thing because I don't want to paint it just silver. Should get this hose that's going to his armor. All right, let's go ahead and work on layering up this armor, which it looks like it's basically just how I finish all of these guys. Here we go, more stuff. A lot of my cav forces tend to lean more mobile and lighter. I feel like being able to move and dictate ranges and line of sight paths will help more than a few armor, but of course I need more table time to be certain. Yeah, it's, I mean, so much of it is really just determined by, whatever game you're playing, like, what is the primary focus of that game? Like, when you get games like 40K, which are really all about list construction, it winds up being more about, like, points efficiency and damage output and survivability and that kind of stuff. And, you know, certainly mobility comes into play, but just mobility is not nearly as important in 40K as it is in other games. And I think it's much to that game's detriment. It's my understanding in 40K right now that the best way to win is just get a really big, beefy, tough as nails block of infantry, drop them on an objective, and watch people try to dislodge you. Which doesn't sound particularly fun, but, you know. I guess people like it. Personally, I've really just got to get to the point where I'm actually playing more. I'm now kind of a painter more than a gamer before COVID, but now it's like... I think in the past year I've played maybe half a dozen miniature games. 5 of them have been in the past month. Played War Machine in college, and my main list only moved on like 3 turns. Step 1, position to buff artillery. Step 2, block until I have an open line to their caster. Step 3, move to attack caster. If it worked, I won. If they were able to work around it, I lost. Yeah, I played War Machine when it first came out. Like, I remember playing it through, like, in first edition back when they did, like, up through, I think, Superiority is when I stopped playing. And I really liked it in the day, but eventually just got to the point I stopped playing it because it felt like I was getting too competitive and turning into one of those hyper-competitive jerks that you see so often in mini wargaming, and I don't like being that guy. But now I take a look at it, War Machine, it's just there's so much going on, and so much of it is just about... War Machine feels like a game about gotchas. And the best part about it was the Press Ganger program and the fact that they really, really encouraged people to like build communities, but then they got rid of that program. And I know why they got rid of it, and I understand why, but it's like I don't entirely agree with it. That whole unintended consequences thing with the magic judges. It's like I understand the judge ruling that. I understand why the judge ruled like they did when they made that decision, but it had a whole bunch of effect on a bunch of different games that had those demo teams. Elmer says, ran a thin line of steelhead halberdiers with choir and redeemers behind it. They stood and shelled until I had a way to arc a death sentence onto the caster. Yeah, I remember that. I played Manoth. I remember that, and I remember just the choir was amazing, because you could be like, this is the turn, you cannot shoot me. Or if you're playing against a Crix opponent, they don't say, "Ha, I don't shoot, I use magic." You'd be like, "This is the turn, you cannot use magic." What I was really disappointed about is that they basically, the Iron King's role-playing game, they came out with like 4 or 5 books for it. It was amazing. It was really well done. And then they just didn't support it. And then they're like, here's Iron Kingdom's Requiem. It's the newer role-playing game. We're going to use D&D 5th edition. And I'm like, you're taking everything that was cool about your game and throwing it out the friggin' window. Why are you doing that? Yeah, Elmer, you can't hit me. AoE templates don't need to hit. No, they don't. Even if they are half damage, whatever. You throw enough at it, you can just pick somebody apart. They gotta land somewhere, and that is not a big table. Yeah, that's one of the things that I was by the end in War Machine when they started like the end when I was playing, when they were just upping the point scale and you're adding more and more to that tiny crowded table. I was like, they need to take this game and move it onto a 4x6 table. Yeah, Elmer says Redeemers, Enquirer, Power 9 missiles. Yeah, no, I remember that. Depending on who your caster was, you can do the high reclaimer and be like, oh, what? Yeah, you want to go and fry him? Go ahead, kill him. Find out how well that works out for you. No, I was just really, really upset that they decided they were going to stop supporting the role-playing game. I ran Severius because that's the only way the Redeemer is actually going to hit. Yeah. Oh, what was it? It was the... Oh god, he had that giant aura of +1 to hit, right? I'm thinking, I remember the big thing about it was that I think it was like 8 focus or something really high like that. Because I remember I ran him, like I think I ran Severius and High Reclaimer, and then they did Apotheosis, and Amana Raza came out, and I just absolutely fell in love with that guy. Yeah, that spell pre-remix said that all attacks the target will hit. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. I remember that. And it's like all of a sudden, like death would rain down upon your opponent's caster. All right, where's our buckskin tail? Yeah. No, I remember the heydays of playing that game and loving all the ridiculous combos that you could throw out. I got burnt out on it, got to the point where I just didn't really enjoy it any much. I didn't like the direction the game was going in. And I've been hearing that, yeah, that's why you stopped playing. From what I understand, I don't even know if Privateer Press is really a thing anymore. I mean, I've been hearing really, really rough things about that company. You say it's like magic? Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. Well, and that right there is realistically when I figured out like the type of gaming that I really enjoy. Yeah, Cat's mini art. I believe she played Magic for a bit when she was younger. No, it is. I mean, that game is basically like playing solitaire. It's like, does my deck function better? Ah, crap, 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 crap. Yeah, no, Ilmarin, I'm completely with you on that. It's like realistically, I wound up figuring out that the way I prefer my games, I prefer them with a high level of interaction between the players, first off. And I very, very much prefer games that are tactical to games that are purely strategic. All right, last step on the armor here. Yeah, it's kind of like what's it called? I know um, there's a really strong Infinity community around here, and Infinity is one of those games where it's like I want to like it. I really, really want to like it, especially considering that there is nothing else in the industry quite like it. Infinity is an extremely unique game, but I just can't bring myself to like it. There's just something about it that doesn't quite sit right with me. Um, every time I look at the miniatures, I've painted quite a few of them. It's like these are the most technically excellent miniatures I've ever seen that I just can't like. And I think it's because they really went all in on the anime aesthetic, and I appreciate that they have a very, very sure aesthetic. I just don't care for it. Looks like we got a couple more viewers in, so hello everybody who is hopping in. We got Commander Root, Grubbiness, Ilmarin, Cats Mini Art, and L West UCF. L West UCF, if you're listening here, you should be painting. That is what you should be doing right now. Actually, I think this guy's pretty close to done. So let's go ahead and hop back over to him. Let's get some more of this aged bone. Wes is playing UCF, is playing D&D. Then what are you doing listening in on us? Go play D&D, you weirdo. You're painting earlier. Well, I do appreciate you hopping in. I especially appreciate you saying hi, because number of unique chatters is one of the analytics that Twitch pays attention to for affiliate monetization, and I do need to increase both of those. All right. All right. Some of this red. Because this is a demon, we're just gonna dot the eyes red. Alright, let's go ahead and drop some washes. Let's get Reichland Flesh Shade on those ears that I've accidentally painted like horns. sepia. Let's do a step up on this red now. Yeah, I think that red's fine. This guy's just going to be a real quick job anyway. He's not designed to be, like, super incredible. Alright, so let's go ahead and pull in. We're going to be done real soon. So we have Shining Mithril for, like, a final detail. Ilmarin, I need to finish the stack of Derbyshire Cab. Speaking of light maneuverable and counterplay. Also, doing the I like this model stats and aesthetic, but I'm not enjoying painting them. Ah, that sucks. Oh, I feel for you, brother. Oh my god. Sometimes that just happens, though. Sometimes where it's like, I like the model, by all accounts, I should love doing this, but I just cannot get into it. So we got that Mithril Silver. We're going to go ahead and just do some dots on the guns. Just bring them up a little bit. Okay. And then do what I like doing with the Mithril Silver and use it as a final little highlight on gold. Alright. Yeah, the way they look, but I'm painting deep out, and there's so many recesses to ink. And when I get to the plates, it will be fine. Yeah, and honestly, like, the best I can tell you, man, for that is practice. Like, I know I had a couple people during CavCon who were watching me work on that Tuseki. And even, like, the Cav guys were saying that I do the recessing and the panel lining really fast. And that's just because I have painted so many goddamn Space Marines. I have painted so many Space Marines for money or kill teams or anything like that. And I tell you what, if you paint 100 Space Marines, you will get really, really fast with that recess shading and the edge highlighting. Alright, well, we are going to go ahead and rim his base. We're going to ring his base. We got a pure black. Because the Bat Demon is just going to be a really, really swift, simple, let's get this guy done so I can use him when I want to paint job. We're going to go ahead and we got some Dusky Skin highlight here. I'm going to go and dry brush that base. Yeah, Ilmarin says it's almost certainly better if you're doing 1 instead of 4. Yeah. You know, the thing is, though, I mean, honestly, doing that kind of stuff, painting miniatures, especially if they're, like, pain in the ass miniatures like that, it's kind of like owning a dog, where, like, 2 dogs is way more dog than 1 dog. 3 dogs is really not much more dog than 2 dogs. Should have done this before I ran the base, but I didn't. I'll probably put like some tufts or something on here. All right, well, I think that's probably where I'm going to call it for the night. With this Dinosaur Man, I'm officially 10 Stargrave crew members in. So we got some fancy stuff on his face. Got the standard base, and then I did just a really quick, simple job on this Bat Demon just to show dry brushing, a little bit of layering, all that kind of fun stuff, and just get him done really quick. So, alrighty. So Ilmarin says, really like the gold tie-in on this armor. They pulled together so well. They really do. I'm very happy with how they're looking. And on top of that, like, not only does that gold, I'm going to put a little tiny bit more on this guy. Not only does that gold like really help tie them in, but it's also like neutral enough that I can have these dino people and whatnot and these aliens with these really, really bright, vibrant skin tones. Just a little bit there. A little bit there. We can do these vibrant skin tones, and the yellow is like so neutral and bland that they it's like it doesn't overpower any of it. So it kind of gives me like free reign to do whatever I want with everything except that armor. And I really having fun with it. I think the only thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to have any of them with straight purple skin. And by the way, LACCF, I don't know if you're talking about my Stargrave minis or the Stargrave minis of my North Star military figures, but those actually do look surprisingly good too. I am really, really proud of my Stargrave crew. I've been working a lot harder on them. I've been stepping my game up a lot. I've been doing a lot more blending and a lot more layering than I normally do. And I think it shows. LSUCS says mine. Yes, thank you very much. I'm proud of them. I'm proud of them, and I think I should be. Really what it is the fact that I think that these are probably the best looking minis I've painted in a long time. And it took me a long time to stop comparing my work to the work of others. I believe it was Hemingway that said there is no honor in superiority to your fellow man, only in superiority to the man you used to be. So with this, I'm really trying to push myself, and I'm proud of myself because I'm obviously leveling up in my painting. And I do think that these are looking better than the previous stuff that I did. So, all right, guys. Well, it's been almost 2 hours. I'm going to go and call it for the night. I do hope you guys had fun. Ilmarin, thank you for coming in and saying hi to me. Thank you for everyone else who joined. Be safe. You be safe as well. Be good to each other, and keep painting, guys. Show off what you make. Take care, everyone.